You're probably looking at the thumbnail thinking, oh great, another snake video. But trust me, this isn't your typical snake story. This is about how one snake species managed to pull off the most devastating rampage in ecological history. It's the 1940s, World War II has just ended, and US military ships are heading back to Guam. But among all the cargo, supplies, and tired soldiers, there was an uninvited passenger that would change the island forever. A brown tree snake, most likely a female. You're probably thinking, how bad could one snake be? What if I told you that this single stowaway would lead to multiple species going extinct, island-wide blackouts, and people finding snakes in their toilets? Yes, really, and millions of dollars in damage. Stick around because the story gets wild. What's the longest you think a snake can go without eating? Drop your guess in the comments because the answer, coming up later, might shock you. And before we go into the main story, here's a fun fact. Nobody even knew the snakes were there until things started going terribly wrong. But before I tell you about the chaos that followed, let's talk about our unwanted guest, the brown tree snake. And no, despite its boring name, this isn't your average garden variety serpent. This is a highly skilled predator that was about to find itself in an all-you-can-eat buffet called Guam. Before we go further, why not hit that like button? It helps the algorithm show this video to other people who might enjoy learning about invasive species. Now, if you think this will be some boring nature documentary, let me stop you. You can't be further from the truth. We've got an entire island with no idea what is coming. But wait, I hear you asking, where did the snake actually come from? Well, our snake's hometown is Papua New Guinea, and let me tell you, this isn't exactly a short distance. We're talking about thousands of miles of ocean between these places. You know how sometimes you move to a new place and everything just works out perfectly for you? Great job, lovely apartment, fantastic food scene. Well, that's precisely what happened to our snake friend. It landed in an all-you-can-eat paradise, where none of the local animals had any idea what a snake even was. Let me paint you a picture of what happened next. Birds? Gone. Local lizards? Vanished. People's pet cats? Mysteriously disappearing. And here's where it gets really terrifying. These snakes started showing up everywhere. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere in the houses, compounds, and even toilets. Now, think about the worst place you've ever found an unwanted critter in your home, because Guam residents might just have you beat. But it gets even worse. Remember how I mentioned blackouts earlier? Yeah, these sneaky serpents had a peculiar hobby, climbing electric poles. This often caused frequent power outages on the island, leading to millions of dollars in economic loss. Now you might be wondering, how did one snake cause all this chaos? Well, plot twist, it wasn't just one for long. These snakes were living their best life, with no natural predators and a comprehensive array of unsuspecting prey. Now, let's talk about the devastating impact of this unintentional introduction of the brown tree snake on Guam. Imagine being a bird in Guam before these snakes arrived. Life was pretty sweet, right? No predators, plenty of food, living in a tropical paradise. And then, one day, everything changed. Do you know that feeling when you're playing a video game in easy mode and suddenly someone cranks it up to impossible? That's what happened to Guam's native birds. These poor creatures had zero defense strategies, no snake awareness training, no predator evasion skills, nothing. But these snakes weren't picky eaters at all. Birds? Yum. Lizards? Snack time. Rats? Why not? They are opportunistic feeders, so anything and everything goes. But if they were such a food-loving species, how did they manage to survive on the ships that must have traveled for months before arriving in Guam? It all boils down to two essential qualities that the brown tree snake possesses: the ability to survive without food and hide themselves very well. Remember earlier when I promised to tell you something shocking about how long these snakes can go without food? Get ready for this bombshell. These slithery survivalists can go months without eating. Some of you are typing already. No way, that's impossible. But I kid you not. And this superpower, it's precisely what made them such successful invaders. They could hide in military cargo, survive the long journey, and then emerge ready for a buffet in Guam. And if you're wondering, how did they survive in ships? Imagine being so good at hide and seek that you could win an Olympic medal. That's these snakes for you. But that's not all. Remember those power outages I mentioned? Now imagine sitting at home, watching your favorite show, and suddenly, darkness. Why? Because a snake decided your power line looked like a tree branch and was just slithering along. These blackouts weren't just occasional inconveniences. We're talking about outages lasting up to 4 days, costing over $1 million annually. That's right, these snakes were literally sending Guam back to the Dark Ages. Drop a light bulb emoji in the comments if you've ever experienced a power outage. And let me know how long it lasted. I bet none of you can beat Guam's snake-induced blackout record. But perhaps the most disturbing part, these snakes didn't just stick to the wilderness. Oh no, they decided to get personal. Imagine being a teacher and hearing this excuse. Sorry I'm late, there was a snake in my toilet. And the crazy part? That would be a valid excuse in Guam. Before we move on to how Guam tried to fix this mess, what do you think was the most creative solution they came up with to control these snakes? How would you deal with thousands of sneaky snakes taking over an entire island? Do you call in the snake whisperer? Host the world's largest game of snakes and ladders? Or drop poisoned mice from helicopters? Give up and move to another island? If you pick the third option, congratulations. Because yes, that's actually what they tried. And no, I'm not making this up. Let's rewind to 2012 when someone in a meeting room probably said, "Hey, what if we..." and then pitched what sounds like the plot of a B movie. It involves helicopters flying over the jungle, dropping mice attached to cardboard streamers. And these weren't just any mice. They were equipped with acetaminophen, which is basically Tylenol. It turns out that what helps your headache can stop a snake. I can see some of you typing, "Wait, they just threw mice out of helicopters?" But here's where it gets even more interesting. Someone thought, you know, what this mouse dropping operation needs? Robots. Enter the ABS, or the aerial bait system. Think of it as a mouse dropping vending machine attached to a helicopter. Instead of manually throwing mice out the door, they created an automated system. But there's more. While some people were playing aerial mouse bombardment, others were thinking about the bigger picture. The scientists started a captive breeding program for birds. Plan? Keep the birds safe until they can deal with the snake situation. It's like saying, "Hold on, birds. We just need to handle these 1,000 snakes first. Then you can come back home." And here's another thing they did to deal with the situation. They didn't just stop at mice and birds. They brought in snake-detecting dogs, snake traps, and snake fences. But the million-dollar question remains. Literally, given how much they're spending on this, will all these efforts work? Here's a mind-bending thought. While all this is happening, the snakes are just living their best lives, probably wondering why it's randomly raining mice sometimes. As we wrap up this video, what is the craziest solution you can think of for dealing with invasive species? Honestly, after all the mice dropping from helicopters thing, I believe we are open to suggestions. But scientists are working with the government to bring the situation under control. I think we can also be thankful that while the brown tree snake is venomous, its venom is not fatal for an adult. We've been on quite the wild ride, haven't we? From toilet-invading serpents to mouse-dropping helicopters. This story has everything except a happy ending. Yet, the battle isn't over, but the plot twists keep coming. Will Guam ever be snake-free again? The truth is, well, it's complicated. But do you know that's not the only time an invasive species turned a whole nation upside down? A more innocent-looking creature that was brought into Australia innocently has plagued them for decades and is now a major problem. Let's talk about the time Australia imported an army of toxic toads and immediately regretted it. Ever made a decision so bad it poisoned an entire continent? No? Well, congratulations. You're already doing better than 1980s Australia. Look at this face. This might be the most expensive mistake in Australian history. And trust me, in a country where they once declared war on emus and lost, that's saying something. These toads have been giving Australians nightmares for decades. But wait, I can hear some of you asking, why would anyone willingly bring these toxic troublemakers to Australia? Well, hit that like button and let me take you back to a time when Australia's sugarcane farmers were desperate. Scientists thought they had a brilliant idea, and nobody stopped to ask whether importing an army of poisonous toads might possibly backfire. It was in the 1980s in Queensland. Sugarcane fields stretched as far as the eye can see. Farmers living their best lives, making that sweet, sweet sugar money. The climate was perfect, the soil was rich, and everything was going great until it wasn't. See these little grubs? These tiny troublemakers were about to change Australian history. They might look harmless, but these beetle larvae had a particular taste for sugarcane roots. Help, our crops are dying! That's what farmers were screaming to anyone who would listen. And guess what? The government listened. They set up this fancy-sounding organization called BEES, the Bureau of Sugar Experiment Stations. However, nobody, not even the farmers, could have imagined what happened next. Have you ever tried to solve a minor problem only to create a massive one? That's the kind of situation that happened here. They were deliberating on a solution when they heard Hawaii had the same problem, and they found a fantastic solution: cane toads. Look how well it worked in Hawaii, they said. These toads are eating all the beetles, they said. And technically, they weren't wrong. But the cane toads were not just eating the beetles, they were eating everything. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Hold up, if these toads were such a disaster, how come they did not do this much damage in Hawaii? Here's the thing. Hawaii had a few geographical advantages that Australia didn't. First off, Hawaii is basically a tiny dot compared to Australia's entire continent. But here's the real kicker. Hawaii's isolated islands already had fewer native species to begin with. Most importantly, they didn't have large predators trying to make a snack out of these toxic hoppers. No predators, no mass poisonings. Pretty simple math, right? But that's not all. Hawaii's climate kept the toads in check. They couldn't spread as far or as fast as they did in Australia's vast, warm territory. This explains why it seemed to work pretty fine in Hawaii, and why the scientists thought it was a good idea to bring the cane toads in as predators for the beetles. So, when Australia saw Hawaii's success story, they kind of missed some pretty important fine print. It's like copying your friend's homework without realizing they're taking a completely different class. So, what did government scientists do? They hopped on the next flight to Hawaii faster than you can say, ecological disaster. They returned with a box full of toads and released them into the fields. Here's a fun fact they missed. These toads, they're the equivalent of that house guest who shows up with a suitcase and stays forever, and invites their entire family, and their family's family. Oh, and they're all toxic. In just 2 months, these hoppy little fellows multiplied rapidly, and their population reached millions in no time. That's millions of poisonous giant toads growing and spreading fast, unchecked. You know that feeling when you throw a party and too many people show up? Now imagine if all those party crashers were poisonous, ate everything in sight, and decided to not just stay at your house, but your entire continent. See those bumps behind their eyes? That's their built-in chemical warfare system. And Australia's native animals? They had no resistance to it at all. A hungry snake spots what looks like an easy meal, hopping along. Dinner, it thinks. One bite later, well, let's just say it's the last mistake that snake ever makes. These toxic troublemakers spread across Australia quickly, and they weren't exactly picky eaters. Beetles? Sure, but also pretty much anything else they could fit in their mouths. Well, anything except the beetles the farmers brought them into control in the first place. So, what do you do when toxic toads overrun your continent? Because, trust me, Australia has probably already tried everything you can imagine. One such solution was toad busting. Yes, that's actually what it's called. How does it work? Imagine it's midnight. You're wearing gloves, carrying a flashlight, and hunting for toads the size of small dinner plates using traps. Yeah, that's the way the busting is done. Scientists got creative too. They tried everything from toad-attracting lights to special sound systems playing toad mating calls. No, I'm not making this up. But here's the thing about cane toads. They're very difficult to get rid of. The toads just keep hopping along, leaving a trail of chaos behind them, and they're evolving. These days, they're developing longer legs and moving faster. The good news? Australia's native wildlife is slowly starting to figure things out. Some species are learning to flip toads over and eat the less toxic parts. And some snakes are just evolving smaller mouths so they can't swallow the toads whole. As for the toads, well, they're living their best life, utterly oblivious that they're Australia's most wanted.